crankshaft into it. Now to do that, you first have to remember there are two dowel pins here that are closer together than the others. And it leaves a wide gap and a short gap, and the ones that are the closest to each other, you have to line up with likewise the dowel pins on the crankshaft that are closest to each other, so everything will fit together. So find the ones that are closest to each other, these two here, and set the flywheel down. Grab your crankshaft. Find the two closest together dowel pins there too, which are right over yonder, and put the two together. And tip it up. Now this is on the ground, don't forget, not on the engine stand. Put the flywheel nut that you recently took off back into the crankshaft. Tighten it down until it's fairly snug. You can do this by hand. Okay. And then the crankshaft is securely attached to the flywheel and serves as a very nice stand with which to take off the rods. The rod nuts require a 14mm wrench or socket, either one. We'll try with the socket here, and then we'll try with the wrench. We can hold it better with the wrench that way. Put the wrench on. Oh boy. Yes, you put the wrench on and you try and take off the rod nuts. On the ground, it's not too hard. On an engine stand like this, as a demo, it of course is much more difficult. So I'll show you how you do this. Take off one rod for you, and then put this thing on the ground where it's safe. These rod nuts are normally torqued to 32.6 foot-pounds. So you loosen them up, come around here and get the other one, which is going to be fun and games. Lots of fun and games. Maybe it's a good point here for the... There we go. Okay, you loosen both rod nuts up. Take a small hammer, tap them a few times, loosen them up some more, tap them again, and take the nuts all the way off. Wiggle the rod, it should come out. Look at the rod bearing for the crud inside it. There's some here, but not a hell of a lot. Take the rod out and check the size. In here you'll find this 0.50mm undersize, which means the crank is ground a second under on this particular rod throw, which is too bad. I was hoping for a standard crank, but which is proof definitely that this engine has been overhauled before. The crank should say standard, and it should have original Porsche part numbers on the rods if it is a bona fide Porsche original engine. This one obviously is not. It's been a part. The crankshaft has been ground a second undersize, and we don't know what the mains are yet because there are no numbers on the bearings themselves. We'll measure with a micrometer and see what it is. There's something else I've noticed here in the process, that this connecting rod has a part number ending in 00 in a fairly wide curved beam. Well, this one down here has a part number ending in 01 without the wide curved beam. So at some point, well, this connecting rod's been replaced, and I bet when we weigh these things we're going to find this rod here is about 20 grams heavier than this one here, which means the engine was grossly out of balance, and maybe the crankshaft is cracked because of that, but we'll have to magnaflux it. We magnaflux the crank, the connecting rods, and we check the heads for cracks. They're aluminum. You can magnaflux steel or iron, but you can't magnaflux aluminum. So we'll go ahead and take off the rest of the rods. If we see anything exciting, we'll let you know. And now the next thing to deal with is the third piece of the case. Okay, I want to show you guys something here. We have a triple beam balance. You can buy these scales for about $70, $80. They work pretty well. This one's been around for 10 years, why it's a little messy. You're going to weigh the connecting rods in that engine. I tared it, so it's 0 here with nothing on it. These should weigh around 450 or so grams, which is almost a pound. 460, a little more than a pound. Okay, 460. Binary search on it, try 5. Pretty close, 4. Okay, 464 grams. Okay, this connecting rod. Get another one from that engine. And it's a little bit heavier, 466, maybe 467. Within 2 grams, that's not too bad. Take another one from the engine. That's a little bit lighter, 465, 464. Within 2 grams, that's really good. Now if the fourth rod were the same, that'd be wonderful. Here's the fourth rod from this engine, Peg City. Okay, 60 grams, 10 grams heavier, still not enough. 20 grams heavier, not enough. 30 grams heavier, not enough. 40 grams heavier, not enough. All right, that's 504. So bring this down to 0, bring this up to 500. 40 grams heavier doesn't do it, but it's getting close. Get in the notch there, pillow. Let's try 50 grams heavier. Doesn't do it. 60? Does it. 51, 52, 52 grams heavier. That's almost 2 ounces heavier this rod is than any of the other 3. This is not balancing your engine. This is the mark of the turkey. The reason for it is this rod has part number ending in 01. It's a late model 912 rod, and of course, ironically, the first one I saw when I started tearing the engine apart, and assumed that all the rest of the rods would be the same. 0.01, the good rod. You know what assume is. Assume makes an ass out of you and me. A-S-S-U-M-E. This rod has a part number ending in 00. It's an earlier rod used in this vintage Super, and likewise the other 2, all 3 of these, are the 00 type rods. And they all weigh about the same. This one here is a later rod, 01 part number, 60 grams heavier than the other 3. It's not going to be possible to balance this connecting rod by taking 60 grams off of it to equal the others. Either we'll have to replace it with another rod of this type, or replace all 3 rods of those with 3 of this type to make a balanced set. And for this engine, I'll probably go that route and put in a set of 912 type connecting rods with the 01 part number and do it that way. Just thought you guys might like to see what can happen if you just randomly replace a rod that looks the same without making any effort whatsoever to balance it. 60 grams is a hell of a lot, and the crankshaft may be cracked because of that. In fact, this particular crankshaft was second under on the connecting rods. That means a second under size, 0.50 millimeter, and standard on the mains, so it was down about 2/1000ths on the mains. It's in fact down about 1 1/2 on second undersize on the rods, so it may have to be ground to first under on the mains by third under on the connecting rods, or replaced. It may be cracked anyhow. If it's cracked, it's garbage. So we'll find out what it's like after we magnaflux it, but I thought you might like to see the difference between these connecting rods. Between a total of 516 grams for those, 464, so 464 on the other one. 60 grams, almost 2 ounces. Incredible, isn't it? Okay, now we're going to take the third piece of case apart as far as take the accessories off of it. It's best you do this on the ground, not on a stand, but we're doing this to show you easily how it's done. Oil pump drive is on the inside, like yay. You loosen all 4 nuts, take them all off on the long bolt, and take something that won't destroy the oil pump drive and tap it like this, like so. And if you're careful, the whole assembly will pop out, which it just did. And you can inspect the gears for any wear of the gear teeth here. Here, obviously, we have to replace this gear because it's really badly worn. And it really helps to have these cleaned up, but they look pretty good except for the wear on the end of the tang. Way back when, these shafts were replaceable, but after about 1961 and a half, thereabouts, they stopped making them replaceable. They had a little key on the inside, and the shaft would actually fit inside the gear, but now the gear is pressed on the shaft, and you really can't replace them too easily. So we have to replace the whole gear. Oil pump drive gears are available. They're a little hard to find now, but they are available. So this we'll have to either re-weld or replace, and I'll probably replace it with a new one. The other gear, the driven gear, looks okay, but like I say, we have to clean it all up before we can tell. So let's put this in the to be taken to the machine shop to be cleaned and checked batch. Now, to get the bearing out here, we have to take out the seal and the oil slinger inside. Take out the seal, you put a screwdriver here, ding in the seal, and pry it out that way. That's the way it's done. I'm sorry you ruin the seal when you do it, but the seal is garbage anyhow. So we'll take a screwdriver, and we'll stick it inside there. And with a little bit of luck, you won't knock the case on the floor. In fact, if you pardon my posterior, I'll get in here to where we can do it effectively. Like so. Don't do it this way. Put it on the floor and point the screwdriver away from you so don't stab yourself in the gut. And sue me. Pry it up gently. Take the oil seal and toss it in the garbage pile. That's what it is now. Take the oil slinger out and put it in a very special place, your safety deposit box. These are very hard to find, and you're much better off using one than not using one, so put it where you won't forget it. Now, for the dowel pin bolt that holds the dowel pin in place, it's a 14 millimeter across the flat bolt with a funny dowel pin end to it. So you take it out, and you must take it out first to get the bearing, it's in the third piece here, out. You take it out. It'll be tight to the last thread, and there's lots of threads. And you see why they call it a dowel pin bolt, because the end of it looks like a dowel pin. In fact, it is a dowel pin to hold the number 4 main bearing in place. This should be plated too, because the head, you see, is pretty obvious, and you should plate this. Put that in the to be plated box. And then, to get out the main bearing, the right way is to heat the case up and tap it. Tap it out. You can, however, take your 36 millimeter socket, put it on, making sure it only touches the bearing and nothing else. Take a hammer, like yay, and a couple of, one, good tap, and it's out. The bearing sets come with this in as a number 4 main bearing, and you can throw it away, or you actually use it. You want to save this to put the old bearing, the new bearing in with the old bearing. You tap it in that way, and therefore use this as your bearing installation device. One more thing, and we're done with the third piece. We can take it in the machine shop to have it clean. The oil pressure relief and bypass plug and spring and valve that's inside this area here can be removed one of two ways. The bespectacled Beckel likes to take a screwdriver, a wide one, or just a hammer and pound on it. He claims you take a sledge or something heavy and go whack, whack, whack. You can then remove it with a decent screwdriver. That compresses the gasket supposedly, and you can take it off. You find it doesn't work all the time. You can take a pair of vice grips, put the vice grips on it, and then push down, and it comes off pretty easily. In fact, a combination of the two is really the best way to get it out. The plug here, the thing I'm unscrewing now, can be plated. In fact, should be plated, make it look nice. The spring, there's two types of springs. This is a narrow coil, mini coil, small wire diameter spring clip, spring. It's used for the bypass valve. And the valve, you can use your little finger if you have nice, long, subtle little fingers. If you don't, you can use a special plunger removal tool available through Volkswagen or Porsche dealers. Try tapping it. Normally this works, but of course this time it's not going to do it. Anyhow, you can actually sort of see it. It's in there. The Maestro, of course, has a special device for removing it, but sometimes if you're out in the boonies and don't have a special device, almost, you can use what nature gave you. Oh, it almost came out. Come on, baby. Oh, you can do it. If not, you can take it to a machine shop. And the machine shop usually has a device. It's an internal expandable plunger type that allows you to grip the plunger easily and pull it out. If you have to, a 7/16 tap will usually get it out too. SAE tap. Can't quite do it. Let's see if the other finger is going to work. I should ask the local teenage girl to do this, but I can't find her right now. Well, we'll get it out, don't worry. Anyhow, now, once that's out, the third piece is ready to be cleaned. So put this in the part that goes to the machine shop. Now likewise, on the main case half, the oil pressure relief valve is here, and this should likewise come out. So I give the old bespectacled Beckel technique, tighten it down, pull up, and lo and behold it works. Without scoring the outside diameter of the plug too much, you can then unscrew it. Please do this on the ground, not on top of an engine stand. Don't want you to blame me if your case falls on the floor and cracks. And note that this spring, I'm going to close up of that while I attempt to get the plunger out of this one. Note the springs are different, and indeed they are different. The wire of this spring that makes it up is thicker, larger diameter. The number of turns is fewer than this one here. This is thinner diameter wire, more turns. This is the oil pressure bypass in the third piece. It's the oil pressure relief spring in the main case half. And don't confuse them, because this provides the oil pressure of your engine. It's a stronger spring than this one is, and it provides decent oil pressure, minimum 45 psi when you're running, pounds per square inch. This one, if used as oil pressure relief spring, will lower the oil pressure of your engine, leading to premature failure. And again, we're going to have to use a special device to get it out rather than our given fingers. Anyhow, that's about where we're at now. The case is pretty well stripped out. We, of course, will remove the cam followers before we clean it. But to go to the machine shop, we can leave the cam followers in. We'll surface the cam followers, put a nice spherical radius on them. We will polish the crankshaft or grind it or replace it. We'll balance everything, balance the crank, balance the flywheel, balance the pressure plate, balance the rods end for end and total weight, balance the pistons. We'll hog the heads out to mate with Solex intake manifolds for Weber usage. We'll put a big bore kit on it, and we'll make this engine into something that's a really good one, both in looks and performance. So stay tuned for the next half of the tape. You can go have dinner now. Go have a beer, whatever. We're going to do that. The next step is to take this to the machine shop and show you the machine operations involved in making this into, from what you see it is now, into something really nice. So bear with us. It's taken about 2 hours to get to this stage. It'll probably take another 4 to get it done, but when it's done, it's done. And it'll last for 100,000 miles. Thank you for bearing with us so far. We appreciate your support. Okay, we're at the machine shop now. This is the flywheel holder. It's made out of an old crankshaft that was cracked. You use it to hold the flywheel, and here you can see the flywheel inside surface. That is the surface where the clutch disc rides. Is being machined here. That's the beginning of it. You'll note that the flywheel is a little bit out of round. That's why these sparks are sinusoidal. You first have to do that surface on the inside where the clutch disc goes. And as you see, as we progress through this, the sparks get more and more intense. In fact, it's pretty impressive here. This is a grinding operation, not a lathe type. We don't use lathes to surface flywheels, mainly because the flywheel can have a heat-treated area where the clutch is essentially heat-treated it, made it quite hard. And using a lathe to fix that means that, or to grind it, or actually turn it, means that when the lathe tool hits the hardened surface, it shatters, resulting in a very poor surface. If you grind the flywheel, you get a much better surface than you can get on the lathe, especially if the flywheel is heat-checked or something of that nature. As you can see here, we take several passes to machine the flywheel. In fact, the grinding operation only takes about 1/1000th of an inch or so off with each pass. If you're going to machine the flywheel down, say about 10 thousandths, you have to do about 10 separate passes in order to get it down that far. It's getting down there now on the inside surface. As you can see, the sparks are pretty continuous. Now here we're doing the outside surface. If you machine the inside surface with a disc ride, you also have to machine the outside surface. And you have to measure the depth. 180 millimeter flywheels have 24 millimeter depth, and 200 millimeters have 25 millimeter depth. And you must get the depth correct. If you don't have the depth correct, your clutch may not work too well. And here we are at the beginning of the flywheel surfacing on the outside surface to bring the outside surface and therefore the depth back to where it should be. As you see, it's a very impressive demonstration of grinding operation, almost like the 4th of July out there. The sparks it produces are quite intense. The shield's been removed here so that we can give you the visual effect of all this. In fact, eventually here we'll turn the shop light off. Here's a nice close-up of it. Even give you the sound of it, so hang on. While the flywheel is still on the grinding machine, it's a good idea to polish that sealing surface area of the flywheel. And here we are polishing it. Take successfully finer grits of emery paper, and while the flywheel is spinning, proceed to polish the sealing surface where the flywheel seal actually does the sealing. That surface is rough, it'll tear up the seal, and you'll have an oil leak that will require the flywheel being removed and this operation done. In very bad cases where the flywheel seal area is really terrible shape, you have to grind off about 3, 4, 5 thousandths off of that inner hub in order to fix it so that the seal will actually seal. There you can see the little ring formed by the seal over the years and how nicely we polished it. Can't get rid of that little ring except by machining the flywheel, but usually polishing it's enough. Look at that nice surface. That's a really nice surface produced only by grinding. A lathe will not do that. That's a very, very nice flywheel. We'll put this flywheel back on the engine here in a few minutes and show you how that's done. A few more stages to go beyond this one, of course, if you're going to do the balancing work right. After the flywheel is surfaced and the seal area is polished, we have to put the dowels in, the alignment dowels for the pressure plate. Here you see those going in. Takes 2 or 3 of them. We like to put 3 in. That way everything is symmetrical and you don't affect the balance of the flywheel, since they're put in at 120 degrees and therefore they won't affect the balancing. Then you got to grind down, put the pressure plate on and grind down the dowels so they don't stick out too far. It's stupid to have the dowels stick out a long ways. So here we're grinding down all 3 dowels to be equal with the pressure plate. Next step after this, of course, is to balance the flywheel. You see that also produces a fairly nice shower of sparks, and that's a nice bench grinder using sandpaper on the grinder. It serves a multitude of purposes, including used for removing weight off the connecting rods while balancing them. When done correctly, this does not cause any overheating of the part. Here a lot of sparks are produced, but not a hell of a lot of material is removed. So next stage here is going to be the balancing, and in just a few seconds here we will take you over and show you the balancer. Okay, before we do that, you have to take a file and round off, bevel the outside area of the dowel pin we just ground down. And here's a flywheel balancing operation. We first put the flywheel on, and then by using the strobe and using clay weights, as it were, on the flywheel, we determine what position is correct. There's the weight being put on. When the flywheel finally balances, the dial indicator there on the left of the screen will indicate how well the flywheel is balanced. Anyhow, as you put mass on the light spot of the flywheel to balance it, once you find the position where it's balanced with enough clay, as it were, then you take mass off the heavy side of the flywheel by drilling. As you see here, he goes opposite where the clay is. The clay is down at the bottom of your screen. See the clay there? There it is. He goes up to the top, the opposite side, and drills lightning holes in the flywheel to remove mass. And by doing a few trials here, we can eventually get the flywheel so it's very well balanced. Occasionally you have to do 2 or 3 holes there. There you see another hole being formed. It doesn't take a lot of mass, but we have found that normals are the worst offenders. They're not very good. Supers are a little better, and Super 90s are pretty good. 912s are actually excellent. This is about the last time through for it. This should just about do the balancing, and we'll let you hear the sound of a balancer in operation at about 6,000 RPM. Okay, now we've added the pressure plate to the flywheel, and we'll be balancing the pressure plate by the same technique. By the grace of the Porsche gods, this particular pressure plate was basically perfectly balanced and didn't need any lightning holes anywhere on the circumference. But if they do need lightning holes on the circumference, then you of course would drill them. Same technique is used as in balancing a flywheel. You take the clay mass and stick it on the pressure plate until you get the combination balanced. Then you remove mass from the opposite side where the clay mass is located. Use the dial indicator on the left-hand side there is used to indicate on the shaft bearings there and tell you whether or not the flywheel pressure plate combination is balanced or not. The unit also has a strobe which flashes at the heavy side, and if the strobe is not flashing at all or flashing continuously but mostly not flashing, then likewise it's balanced. Let's listen to this one now. Okay, now we're going to be porting the heads. First, you put Dicom on the cylinder head so you can scribe the outline of the Solex intake manifold gasket, which is what this is here. You scribe a mark around the ID of the Solex intake manifold gasket. It indicates the outside regime of where you want to cut the metal away. As you can see, it forms a very nice scribe mark, and that will be your waste material that you want to remove. Here's another shot of the other cylinder head having the scribe mark placed on it. Use the Solex intake manifold gasket as a template. It works very nicely. Scribe the mark in there, like so. And then we'll take the special cutting tools and hog out the head to match that mark and smooth everything over. Okay, here's the first tool. It's air operated. It does a very nice job of removing quite a bit of aluminum. And in fact, if you would like to hear this tool in operation, I'll be happy to accommodate you, so hang on. we've changed to much more of a sandpaper-like tool to smooth out everything. We've proceeded in cutting away most of the material we want to, and now it's a matter of smoothing all the contours out to get the port nice and smooth for a maximum intake flow. This type of tool will do a good job without removing a lot of mass, a lot of material, and is therefore used for the finishing process. In fact, you have successive fineness, roughness of the sandpaper type that will allow you to smooth out the ports very nicely. In fact, this tool can also be used for doing the intake manifold, smoothing that out. And in fact, the smoother you make everything, the better everything likes it as far as the airflow and the gas flow is concerned. It never hurts to smooth things out and polish things unless it's sheet metal. It tends to run hotter that way. Here's the finished product. Alright, now here we have guide removal. Note the head is smoking because it's quite hot, heated up to over 400 degrees. There's a special technique for removing the guides that we've discovered or invented. And it takes the guides out without risk to the head. In fact, near the end of this tape, we'll show you what happens to a cylinder head where somebody attempted to remove the guides cold and it didn't work. This is a semi-secret technique as far as how it's done, but as you can see here, it's quite effective. The guides come out with very little pounding. Then while the head is still hot, you can still check the bores of the head and make sure everything is fine. Then stick in the new guides, lubricate them a little bit with special lubricant, tap them a few times, and take a drift and pound it down flush with the head, and they go in very, very nicely, as you can see. If you want to hear the sound of this operation, we'll be happy to oblige. Okay, notice the one head had the remains of a chunk piston. This engine has been through the mill a bit. We had a spun rod, badly spun rod on one crankshaft journal, and a chunk piston at some later time. That's why the pistons were in such good shape. So here we're going to clean this area of the head up a bit. Heads are not cracked, so they're okay, except for this problem here. The surface of the moon-like material can be removed, any chunks that remain in the head. Then you take another tool on your air compressor, proceed to smooth out the head with it. Works very effectively. You don't want to take too much off. You affect the volume of the combustion chamber too much. You have to do all four then, make the volume equal. If you just take a little bit off, there isn't too much of a problem with affecting the cylinder head volume. So we're going to let you listen to this tool here if you'd like. If not, turn the sound off on your TV set. Again, we change tools and go to more of a sanding disc type that will allow you to smooth out the head without removing vast quantities of material. This is the final operation of polishing the combustion chamber after we've done a lot of the cutting away of the rough area of the head. Still be a little rough in places. The deep gouges, some of them will still be there, but in general the head will be smoothed out very nicely. We use this on the number 1-2 side, the much more benign side of the engine. The other good head we'll put on the 3-4 side, and things will actually run. Clean everything out with either a gun cleaner or whatever you happen to have handy, pipe cleaners, whatever. We have a nice cleaner to clean the guide out, make sure everything's clean. We'll also clean it in solvent, etc. before we do the valve job. And there you have it, much better than before. In fact, many heads that have this problem can be cleaned up easily. Alright, next step is flight cutting the cylinder head. We use a bridge port to flight cut the cylinder head, and as you see here, it's doing a pretty good job of cutting. You want to minimize the amount taken off. In most cases, you can clean the cylinder head up by taking less than 10,000ths of an inch off of it. We shoot for about 6 or 7 thousandths, but in some cases where the cylinder is dug into the head, or there's been some other damage from like excessive blow-by or leakage between the head and the cylinder, you have to take off more than the 10 thousandths. But in general, 10 thousandths is a good number. After the flight cutting has occurred, then we have to surface the cylinder head to get the depth of the cylinder head the same. from the top to the bottom and 0.375 inches. If you just do the flight cutting without surfacing the outside surface of the head, then you end up with the depth of the head increasing. If it increases too much, then the cylinder can actually seal not on the inner surface, but on the outer surface against the shoulder of the cylinder. And the shoulder of the cylinder is, of course, not designed to do the sealing, and consequently, you can get very bad leaks when that happens. In fact, I've seen that quite a bit on the El Cheapo overhauls, where they just fly cut the inner surface of the head and don't do any outside surfacing. We can take a close look here, and we'll let you listen to the sound of the Bridgeport in action. Always measure the depth of the head after the fly cutting has been completed. Make sure it's 0.375 inches. Next step here, we're going to do a valve job. So first of all, we take our brand new valves and proceed to polish the valve stems. Even brand new valves can have burrs on the valve stems. Used valves almost always have burrs. And these burrs can cause the valve to chip away pieces of the guide during operation. Pieces of guide can cause the valve to seize in the guide. A seized valve in the guide is something you don't want. If it's an exhaust valve, it can seize open and hit the piston. That can cause lots of fun. It's an intake valve, it can seize open and not hit the piston, but backfire through the carburetor and catch your carburetor, maybe and or car, on fire. So always polish the valve stem of the valves, either new or used. Here we have the spring tester. This tests each spring. You want to see at least 70 pounds on each spring. And here you see 90 on that particular one there. We'll test a few of them for you so you can see what the gauge reads. Note the gauge goes up to essentially 1,000 pounds if you want to go that high for a Caterpillar diesel or something maybe. Anyhow, the standard height is about 39 millimeters or 3.9 centimeters, around 40 millimeters or 4 centimeters. And here you see there's a low one that's at 75 pounds. We like to use 70 as a lower limit of use. In fact, we'll put those springs on the intake, not the exhaust, since the intake's under more benign conditions. The heavier duty ones that run up to about 90 pounds or so, we'll put on the exhaust side. This way you can arrange the springs and get the maximum utilization of the springs. We also have some nice replacement springs in case you can't find any good Porsche springs, or your springs are rusty or test out too weak. Here's the entire setup. New valves, checked out springs, all the retainers and keepers, etc. We're all set to do the valve job now. First thing to do, of course, is to clean everything inside the head. Make sure all the valve guides and the seats themselves are proper. As you can see, this is the good head we're going to use on the number 3-4 side. And look at how nice that Porsche head is. That's one of the reasons I enjoy working on Porsches. They make very good equipment. The stuff lasts a long time when it's treated right and when it's rebuilt correctly, unlike many other vehicles I'm sure we could both name. Okay, so you get both heads, and now we're going to assemble the valves. Put some oil down the guides, make sure you lubricate things. Get out some lubricant for the valve stem itself. Put the lubricant on the valve stem, and stick, of course, the valve down the proper guide. We've already done the valve job. I was going to show you that, but it's kind of hard. When you're doing a valve job, your hands are in the way quite a bit, and it's hard to see, so you can't yet. It requires 3 separate cuts, different stones to do the proper valve job, 3-angle valve job the Porsches require. But as you can see, they're done quite well. The width of the seat's very important. I'd like to see somewhat more than a 1/16 of an inch, but less than an 1/8 of an inch for width. If it's too narrow, it may not seat right, and if it's too wide, there's not enough pressure on the seating surface, and therefore it won't seat right either. So you have to get the width of the valve seating area to be just about optimum, and it's a little more than a 1/16 of an inch if you want to do it in English units. So anyhow, you stick the lubricated valve down the lubricated guide, of course making sure intakes go on the intakes and the exhaust in the exhaust. Here's a close-up of the other side. Note there are no valve stem seals used here. These earlier super and normal heads don't use valve stem seals. In fact, I'm really not a believer in valve stem seals. The factory only used them on the 912 series anyhow. And in general, I find that it's better to have lubrication to the valves and suffer a bit of smoking perhaps, or a bit of oil consumption, than to not have the proper lubrication. So here's the spring height setup. whereby you measure the distance between the inside of the retainer and the base of the sealing area where the shims go in the little cup around where the guide is sitting there. You can see the cup there. And you set everything up to approximately 40 millimeters. It's little different specs for each different head. Most of them are listed in the Maestros spec book or in Secrets of the Inner Circle. I don't have enough time here to mention them all right now. But this is what's happening, is that the height difference there, height is measured, and the ones are selected to make the compressed installed valve spring height the proper number. There's an example of the exhaust valve, setting that up to give you a little bit of info on how that's done. You can use a Porsche tool, but you can also use a machinist ruler if you know what's going on, machinist rule. And we'll show you in a second here the ability to, or how you put the valve springs on with a valve spring compressor. There's a valve spring compressor. Very simple device, but very effective too. Take the valve spring, put the compressor over the valve spring, push down, compresses the valve spring, take the keepers, stick the keepers in, and slowly, also the valve spring should be installed with the more tightly wound coils towards the head side, as opposed to towards the rocker cover, or towards the keeper side. That's the way Porsche recommends. That's the way we install the valve springs. I've seen lots of valve springs on lots of heads where the more tightly wound coils are on the outside, and that's not right. Well, in the second here, we'll show you a better view of how the keepers are actually put on. Little pause there for a moment. Now you can see how nice they look. Here's a close-up of how the keepers are put on. Valve springs compressed, keepers are brought out, slowly fed in, one like so, then the other one. And the valve spring is slowly released, making sure the keeper is contained within the retainer, like so. Then you can fully remove the valve spring. And voila, your valve job is now complete. Final cleanup. We'll lubricate everything when we assemble the engine. And there you have it, one complete valve job. Place up, including our cells. We've changed into our assembly gear outfit with our lucky t-shirt underneath. If you're not a member of the 356 registry, I strongly recommend that you become one. They are in fact the best organization for 356 Porsches in the world, and it costs $13 a year currently to join. And believe me, these days that's a real bargain. So if you want to become a member of the 356 registry, contact Tom Orther. His address and the phone number is in the back of the Maestros spec book, and we'll give it to you upon request. Now, this is the camshaft from the engine we just disassembled. I want to point out to you the wear of the oil pump dry slot. That was worn. Remember the cam oil pump dry slot here drives the oil pump gear that drives, of course, the oil pump and the tach too through the other gear. And this slot wears, of course, both in the cam and the tang on the gear. Now, the tang on the gear is worn so badly we're going to replace the oil pump drive gear. But the slot here in the cam is worn pretty badly too. If you put just another new cam gear in, drive gear on for the oil pump, the cam will proceed to wear it extremely rapidly. So we have a choice here. We can either weld this slot up and regrind it, or we can replace it with another camshaft that has a very excellent slot. In fact, this particular cam has already been ground with the Maestro Master Special Grind. And when you do that, you do more than just grind it. You, of course, parkerize the lobes after it's ground and polish the journals of the camshaft after, of course, checking them for size. Incidentally, the size of these journals is not found in any Porsche publication, but the size is found of both the journals of the camshaft and of the case where the camshaft rides in the Maestro spec book, the only place those numbers are found. Anyhow, you parkerize the cam, which provides for a little lubrication on the cam lobes during break-in, etc. Polish the bearings, and when you put the grind on, you have a very nice grind, this being a Maestro Master Cam Special. Net effect of this is to provide a lot more low and mid-range torque than the 912s normally produce. If this is mated with a big bore kit, you find that you have, in fact, a very nice engine. Feels like an American V8. We can put this grind on any cam except for a normal. It'll fit on a normal, but a normal has a smaller lift. A lift is a distance between the top of the lobe and the base circle. And a normal has 0.280 inches or 280 thousandths of lift while the supers and Cs, etc. have 0.315, 315 thousandths of lift. That means to grind a normal, you have to provide that lift, and you do that by reducing the base circle here. You have to grind this down almost a millimeter just to get the lift back on the normal. So any type of camshaft that's not a normal can be easily ground, that is Super Cs, SCs, Super 90s, and 912s. And the way to tell what kind of camshaft you have is to look at the number that's here between the last lobe and the next to last lobe. And the last 3 digits of the part number will tell you what type of camshaft you have. If it says 102 or 105, you have indeed a 356 Super CSC 912 type cam. If it says 103, that's a normal. If it says nothing, it's a reproduction cam, and other techniques will have to be used to tell what type of camshaft it is. But if it says 102, then the camshaft is grindable, and we can grind the cams for approximately $79, though price is a function of supply and demand. Okay, what we're going to do now is take the cam gear off of our old cam, put it on the new cam. And the way that works is there are retainers that hold the bolt heads in place. You pry the retainer out and on all 3 bolts, and then loosen the bolt. And we'll do that here for you now. It's best to grip it in such a position as you can. We have a nice insulated table here. Just a light tap with your hand like so. Don't do this on the ground or you may affect the teeth of the gear. You want to be certain you don't affect it, put it on something like a paper towel roll. Get the little screwdriver in there, give it a whack with your hand, bend out the tang. It's also a good idea to replace these retainers with brand new ones, though your local Porsche dealer may not know about them. He doesn't usually supply too many parts for 25-year-old funny foreign cars. Get the retainer out far enough to where you can get the wrench on it. And now the fun begins, because you have to hold the cam gear without marking it or hurting it. That's best done by taking a paper towel or rag, putting the cam on a roll of paper towels like so the gear teeth don't get distorted. Put a good wrench on, hold tight, and twist downwards, and lo and behold, it'll loosen. Go around the next one, do the same, and the third one. Sometimes you'll have to pound the retainer back down a little bit more to get sufficient clearance, like yay. Like so. Once they're loose, they usually pop out fairly easily. We've already cleaned this cam up, so it's actually fairly clean now. You can, if these retainers are in good shape, reuse them, but it's better to replace them. We'll pick the best one of the 3 here. I have 2 new ones to show you what a new one looks like. Okay, once you get all three bolts out, the next best thing to do is to get the rubber hammer out. Good old rubber hammer comes in handy. Buy it at Sears or so for $5, $6. And then very carefully tap around alternately the back of the cam gear, and the cam gear will come off. At this point, you should clean off. You can put it in some benign solvent. And speaking of solvent, there are several types of solvents you can use. There's Zep, which is a very good cleaner, but is very dangerous, so don't get it on you or breathe the fumes. Best to do that outside. There's Berryman's carburetor cleaner. That works pretty well, but doesn't last as long as Zep does. It's a good investment to have a 5 or 7 gallon can of carburetor or parts cleaner to do parts cleaning. In fact, it is really required if you're cleaning up an old engine like this. Clean this up, set it aside. We now have to get the dowel pins out. These are alignment dowels for the camshaft. You can best get them out with a punch. It'll fit down inside. You can either use a rubber hammer or you can use a little stronger one. Again, support the cam like yay. 1. Boy, they like to disappear, don't they? Do you see where that went? Over there. Okay. We'll get it. Don't worry. Have an assistant around when you do this to find the dowels when they roll out. Tap, tap, tap. Same place. Go find your brother. Now for the third one, tap, tap, tap. Tap when we saved. All right, my assistant will go out and get the other 2. Proceed to clean these off. You're allowed to get new paper towels when you want to. You should also go through and clean off all the gear teeth of the cam gear and inspect the gear teeth for any type of chips or corrosion or wear, abnormal wear. We've already done that on this cam, and the teeth are all in pretty good shape. In fact, they're all in excellent shape. So, we now take our new cam, put the dowel pins in the camshaft, like yay, tap them in a little bit. Do you have the other one there? Make sure they don't come out all the way. That's pretty good. Wait for our assistant here to give us the other two. We'll put that in. And we'll have a slight pause while we find the other one. Found it. Get them all about even. Now here's a trick of how to install the cam gear. Cam gear will physically fit in one of three positions. You can either put it on this way, to rotate 120 degrees, go on that way, and rotate another 120 degrees and go on that way. Unfortunately, only one of those three ways is correct. If you put it on wrong, your engine is not going to run, guaranteed. This has happened to many people. It's very simple to avoid. If you look very carefully, we get a close-up of this. There is a bolt hole here, and there's a 0, which is the timing mark on the gear right there. You can focus in on that so we can perhaps see that. This is the timing mark. And the simple thing is, when the cam is correctly installed, the oil pump drive slot will be directly in line with this bolt hole and point towards this 0. That's the only position that's correct. All the other ones are wrong. All the other two are wrong. Okay, so now watch this. Find the slot and try and get the slot point to that 0. Let me try one position here. And lo and behold, that turns out to be the right one without even trying. We squeeze it down a little bit. Tap. Get it aligned on the dowels. And now you can see that an extension of the oil pump drive slot through the bolt hole will intersect the timing mark on the circumference of the cam gear. Like I say, it's the only right way of putting it on. Now at this point, we can go get our retainers and bolts, clean them up. Again, incidentally, the bolt heads on a 356 to take a 14 millimeter across the flat wrench. On 912, take a 13. Okay, in fact, these retainers are in excellent shape. I think this is the original camshaft that's never been apart before, judging from the wear on the oil pump drive slot. I think that's indeed a correct assumption. You can clean these up in solvent, whatever. You've already dipped the cam, so they're pretty clean. Put the bent part down into the cam, around the cam gear inner circumference. Take another one. Clean it off. They're, like I say, they were pretty clean. They're still a little bit dirty, but we'll clean them off pretty nicely. You can use red Loctite on these bolts if you want to be assured that they won't come off. If you do that, however, you're going to have a hell of a time getting them off the next time. So it's better just to tighten them down snugly with either blue Loctite without the red if you want to remove them again. I really never heard of a cam gear nut coming loose, but bolt coming loose, but I suppose it's always possible. Anything is possible. I'm sure I haven't seen everything that occurs out there. Get them all in place. Again, make sure that the extension of the slot goes through the notch like yay. It does. Goes to the mark, the 0 mark there. Tighten the bolts down evenly, about a half a turn or so at a time. And the whole cam gear will then, on this alignment dowel, slowly draw everything together. Okay. Do it slowly, don't rush things. Okay, they're all pretty snug. Now get out your roll of paper towels again, so you don't mess up the cam gear. Take the wrench, and for the final tightening, rest the cam on the paper towel roll. Tighten up each bolt individually in turn, about 18 foot-pounds or so if you're using a torque wrench and have some means of holding the cam, but this method usually suffices. Go around several times making sure they're all tight. After that's done, check the dowel pins. Make sure the dowel pins protrude not on either side of the cam. Make sure that is that they are inside the cam itself. And now note on the inside of the cam gear perimeter, you'll find the size of the cam. The size is given either as a 0, +1, +2, or -1, -2. In this particular case, it's a -1. That's the size of the cam gear, and the factory has different size cam gears to mesh with the crank drive gear in such a way as both gears mesh properly. It is best to not to replace your cam gear, but use your old one with your crank gear. If you change crank gears, then you sometimes have to change cam gears. But the combination of cam gear and crank gear that was found in the engine originally should be kept if at all possible. In this particular case, we have a -1. Now, as a final stage here, we go back and pry up the retainers. Put the retainer back around the bolt, and if you use the same retainer and the same bolt, you'll find they'll fit amazingly well. Take a screwdriver or other object like that, carefully pry them back up around the nut, and then take a hammer and tap, resting the cam again on something nice and soft so it doesn't affect the teeth, and tap carefully the retainer around the bolt head. Do it, of course, for all three. Give it a few taps carefully. Try not to miss or try not to score the cam gear surface or anything. A few more taps. Inspect it carefully. Clean it off with a rag. Make sure everything's clean. You could spray WD-40 on it now and clean it, or put it back in cleaner. Get everything as clean as you possibly can. Set it aside now. It's ready to be put in the engine. The old cam, the main problem with it was the fact that the oil pump drive slot was badly worn by the tang of the drive gear. But if you're inspecting cams, one of the things you should look for is pits on the top of the lobe, especially the two middle lobes, which are the intake lobes there. Most super cams will pit there on the intake lobes before they even pit on the exhaust. These are very good. There's one small pit on each lobe. Extremely hard to see except at very close-up. If it is severely pitted, the cam should be ground, and the Maestro Master cam grind can be placed on every cam, even normals, though we like not to grind normals. We'd much rather grind CSC 912 Super 90 cams. They have the right type of lift. Our Maestro Master cam grind fits right on there with no problem. In case you do want a Maestro Master cam grind, contact HCP Research, 20655 Sunrise Drive in Cupertino, California. Now, there are replacement camshafts that are around these days. They have a D4 or an H4 marked between the main bearing and one of the lobes. That's all the marks they have. They have no other marks besides that. They also have a wide lobe type cam. They have wider lobes than this one has. Stay away from any camshaft that has a D4 or an H4 marked in between the lobe and the main bearing. The only good reproduction cam is an RO 200.5 cam. It is usually a wide lobe cam marked with an RO 200.5 on the end. There, the cam. That's the only good reproduction camshaft. Now, if yours has a 15 or a 16 there, that's either a 15 is a C-type cam, and a 16 is either an SC or a 912 cam. They're both the same, actually. So check on the gear end of the cam to see what kind of cam you have. We can, of course, fix this cam by re-welding and regrinding the oil pump drive slot. Okay, this cam is about done now. So at least the cam section of the engine is about done. We have, in fact, our cam all set to go now into the engine. We'll clean up a little bit more, and we'll take a break. Thank you for your support. Rocker shafts and rockers from your engine, the Super we just tore apart. We are going to take the shafts out of here, polish the shafts. You can take them to your machine shop and they can polish them, or you can polish them yourself if you have enough time and patience, or a lathe at home. Very simple to take the shaft off. Sometimes you can pull it out, like yay, but not all the time. In any event, if you have an old 356C or 912, it's got to be a C or 912, intake or exhaust valve, they're just for the perfect size to act as a drift to drive out the rocker. The way it works, you insert the end of the valve in the rocker, grab a hold of the rocker, take your parts cleaner here, tap it a few times, like so. Tough one, usually come out a lot easier than that. And you'll disassemble. Check the shaft for any signs of galling, score marks, etc. Now it's a little hard to do right now because it's so disgustingly dirty. Try and keep all the pieces together, the shims, the spring, little cap, the rocker itself. Put them on one side of the pan, all together. Take another one, like yay. Usually only 2 or 3 taps, like yay, will do it. Again, do a quick inspection. Here we see a little bit of scoring. Now this is the wear side of where the rocker is wearing against the shaft. And if the scoring of the rocker is not too bad and the shaft is not too bad, what you can do is rotate it 180 degrees like so when you assemble it and expose nice new shaft material and get another 100,000 miles out of the rocker. These rockers are not cheap. They're hard to find, getting hard to find in good shape. They can cost $50 or $60 a piece. So if you can save one by reversing the shaft, it's not a bad idea to do so. Those aren't in too bad shape. Here we have one of the intake rockers that's pitted. Right on the end there, if we can get perhaps a close-up of that. The other side too is pitted, perhaps a little worse. Yes, maybe you can see this a little better. I'll try and tip it towards the light. Just a slight pit, series of pits there. We can grind that out with a medium type mill file and about 5 or 10 minutes per rocker, providing the contour by yourself, by hand, will work pretty well. If they were really badly pitted, you have no choice but to replace them. Intake rockers come apart the same way. Put the valve in, tap, 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 tap. Put them in one location. Inspect the shaft. The shaft is pretty good. Again, you can also rotate the intake rocker shaft 180 degrees. Put a screwdriver through here and grab the center section and twist. And that'll allow new virgin material on the shaft to be used as a bearing area. And you can then get longer life out of your rocker shafts. Okay, so here we have the intake rocker shaft completely apart. It's not too bad. It'll clean up nicely. You take the shafts down to your machine shop. They'll put them in the lathe. You can polish the shaft then with emery paper, or you can do it yourself by hand. Just takes some time to do, and the more you get this smooth and polished, the better your rockers will work without seizure, galling, etc. The others will, of course, come apart the same way. Like yay. Try and keep them all together in one particular happy place here. Like so. You generally get the idea here. We'll clean these rockers up and polish the shafts. Reassemble them in time for the assembly of the engine. It'll be all set. This is, of course, these rockers are not put on until after the heads are put on, so we do have some time before we do that. Next thing on the list will be showing you how the gears will fit on the crankshaft and how we assemble the crankshaft with the rods on it. We have a crankshaft that just came back to the machine shop. It's all been balanced and polished. But to show you some of the machine shop operations here. And there we go. So don't throw out all of your intake valves, old 356C or 912 intake valves. Save a couple. They come in handy not just for getting out the rockers, but for jack stands. You have jack stands that require the rod to be put in them for support. These valves make very good substitutes for the rather weak material they normally use at the local Kmart supplied jack stand. These are much stronger steel and will support a lot more weight than the cheapo rods that come with the jack stand. So even old parts come in handy. But now put this in benign solvent, clean everything off, polish the shafts, and get on with the engine assembly. Okay, we have gotten our various components back to the machine shop. I decided to go with 01 style 912 connecting rods. These have all been remachined, the bushings replaced, honed to size, the big end honed to size also. You take a little bit off the parting surface and then re-hone the big end to size that way. And then when the small end is honed, you put this in the bearing master so that the length of the rod, center to center, is the same on all 4 connecting rods. So it helps to have a good machine shop do this. You just don't hone the small end, you hone it on the bearing master. Actually, you bore it on the bearing master, then final hone. We're going to check these just to be sure they're balanced. In fact, these are balanced end for end and total weight. And the way to tell that they're balanced end for end is that the small ends of 3 of the connecting rods will be machined down, and the 4th one will not, because you, of course, take the mass off the 3 heavy rods to bring it down to the weight of the lowest rod, and then balance the big ends by taking mass off the big ends. Just to make sure the machine shop has done a decent job on this, we will weigh them. Remember before we had one rod that was 52 grams heavier than the other 3? Well, let's see what they're like now after we've gotten a decent set here. Okay, just weigh them. Okay, binary search on the weight here. Not too bad, tad more. Like yay. See how the other one does compared to that one. And look at that, right on the money. We'll do number 3. Not bad, huh? Boy, good work is hard to find these days, I tell you. And there's number 4. And you can see they're balanced within about 1/10 of a gram. Now, of course, the weight of the oil on the rod is going to be more than that, so you're really okay with about 1 gram or so. But I like to balance them to 1/10 of a gram. It makes the Porsche gods feel friendly towards you. So now that we've got the rods all balanced nicely, and we know that they are, we can set the scale away. We are going now to assemble the connecting rods. Put them on the crankshaft. We have our crank. It has been reground on both the rods and mains. In fact, when you have this done, it's best to be done by a good crank grinder. Best crank grinder I know is Sammy Hale of Ignacio, California. He does the best radius work of everybody I know. The radius is extremely important. If you have improper radius between the side of the journal here and the journal itself, your crankshaft can crack in less than 10,000 miles. The radius that is put into a Porsche crank is put into the crank from what's on the grinding wheel radius. And if the grinding wheel radius is not dressed properly each time the crank is ground, you can end up with an improper radius and a very short life on your crankshaft. Sammy Hale knows all about this and does excellent crankshaft grinding. He's at Ignacio. He's also in the Maestros spec book. Okay, we can use another flywheel. This particular flywheel is for a street racing engine we're building later on. It's not going to be for our engine right now, but at least the flywheel can serve as a support. Again, we find the 2 dowel pins that are closest together. All the others, there's a wide area here and a narrow area here, and all the others have equal spaced. And we find likewise the dowel pins on the crankshaft that are closest together. And then we feed the flywheel and crankshaft together like so. Take your old flywheel nut, tip things up carefully, put the flywheel nut in place, and we have a pretty good holder here for a crankshaft to assemble it with. With the crankshaft now taken care of for the time being, we turn our attention to the connecting rods once more. To separate the rod cap from the rod beam, loosen the rod nuts, get out your favorite little hammer, tap on the rod nuts evenly, both sides, alternately, and of course the beam will then separate. Loosen the rod nuts up further, and when it comes out like so, take them all the way off, and take the rod off, separate in 2 halves. I'd like to point out something to you here while we have the opportunity. There are numbers on the connecting rod. In this case, this is 966, 996 and 996, 6's and 9's are kind of hard to tell unless you look in the right direction. There's something important about these numbers, two things. One, the numbers should be the same for both the rod beam and the rod cap. That is, the number here should be the same as up on top. Secondly, the number should be on the same side of the connecting rod. Do not, repeat, do not put the connecting rod together with a number here and no number here. In fact, a number on the other side. It won't work right. They're machined together such that the numbers are on the same side of the rod and the numbers are the same. Remember that and don't forget it. Likewise, these rod nuts that are fine to use for machining purposes at the machine shop should be thrown away after that. You should always use new rod nuts when you assemble the connecting rods in the crankshaft, because these rod nuts are designed to distort when they're torqued down to 32.6 foot-pounds. They should not be reused over. They should be thrown away or used just for machining purposes to keep the rod tight while you do the machining on the big end. Okay, so we'll set these here like yay, and we'll go over and redo or remove the other half of all the other rods. The reason why we're doing this is twofold. One, we have to put the rod bearing in, and two, before we do that, we have to clean them. And though they look pretty clean, and actually are pretty clean, there is always a little bit of machine dust, regular dust, whatever, that exists in the rod as they sit, or from the machine shop. In fact, you can tell a lot about the quality of your machine shop by how much crud there is when you do the cleaning afterwards. If there's a lot of crud, you might want to think about what kind of quality your machine shop is doing. Anyhow, three of them. Fourth one's coming up here pretty quickly. You can note the part number. These are the 01 rods. I opted to go for the better CSE 912 connecting rods, which have a part number ending in 01, because they are the strongest rod that Porsche made in the series. The 00 rod that was the original type for this super engine, in fact, if you remember, we had three 00s and one 01 rod, and the 01 rod was 52 grams heavier than the 00 rod. The 00 rod's an okay rod, but the 01 rod is better. And I like to build the best engines I can, so we're going to go with the 00 rod, the 01 rod. Anyhow, take your WD-40 can and spray the inside of both the beam and the cap. Take either a good shop rag or a paper towel, and since maybe you won't have access to a good shop rag, we'll demonstrate this with paper towel. Clean out the inside of all the rods. Look at the area you've cleaned out on the rag or paper towel and see if there's a lot of crud. In this case, there's a little bit of dirt, but not very much, indicating the machine shop did a rather good job of reconditioning the connecting rods and cleaning them afterwards. Many machine shops will just do the hone work, etc., and that's all. They won't do any final cleaning. And the rod can be pretty, have a lot of metal particles from the machining operation in it, can have a lot of dust from the machine shop, and it's up to you to clean them. In fact, it's always up to you to clean them, and you should clean them. If you don't clean them, any dirt inside the engine is your fault. In fact, you're the last guard, inspector, between dirt and your engine. So be sure you get rid of the dirt. We got the bearings. I already ascertained the crankshaft is a second under crank at this point. We have the proper second under rod bearings. They come packaged usually like this, so there's other types of packaging that is possible. These are Glyco bearings. They have the tab on the right-hand side, which will match those connecting rods. The way we put these in, we start with one connecting rod, take the beam in your hand, turn to where the notch is around like yay, grab the first bearing in line, set it in, do not push on the middle here, push only on the ends, like so, get it centered in the beam, and set it back down again. Take the next bearing shell in line, put it likewise in the bearing cap, squeeze only, push only on the ends of the bearing, not the middle, and like so. Repeat that for all four connecting rods. Get any, if you see any dirt or anything like that in the rod, do remove it, do clean it, and put the bearing shells inside both the cap and the beam. Incidentally, Repco or Glyco makes pretty good bearings. Porsche bearings are good too, but they're usually about 3 or 4 times the price. I frankly think that there's not much difference between them. Here's the other 4 in the set. BC 912 bearings have the tab on the right-hand side. A bearings have the tab on the left-hand side. And therefore, you can't use B bearings in A connecting rods or vice versa. You should use, of course, the bearings that are made for the connecting rods. The A-type connecting rod has a part number beginning with 502, while all the other part numbers in the post-1960 rods begin with a 616, as in this case here are 616, 100, 10101. But the early A's, or the later A's, actually all A's, have a part number that begin with 502. But you can always check the tab on the bearing and the tab in the connecting rod to make sure that they are in fact the same. Now it's a good idea, after you get all the bearings in place, to repeat the procedure for cleaning. Spray both halves with WD-40 or your favorite solvent. I like WD-40 because it evaporates. It won't stay on the part for a long time. It actually will evaporate, and therefore it should not be used for preservation. In fact, if you're going to keep an engine for a long time, you shouldn't use WD-40 as a preservation aid. You should use regular oil or our secret sauce, which we'll be mixing up here in a second, to allow you to store the bearings, store the engine, with the secret sauce lubricating everything, literally for decades. I stored engines for 5 years with the secret sauce lubricating the parts, and they work fine after you take them out of storage and fire them up. Now hopefully you won't have to wait that long to get your engine back on the road again, but sometimes that happens. Okay, these are all now finished. Okay, we've got the rods with the bearings in place. They've all been cleaned, all been checked, they've all been balanced, reconditioned, magnafluxed, etc., new wrist pin bushings, blah, blah, blah. We now bring crankshaft and flywheel over. And now, it helps, even though the crankshaft's been cleaned by the machine shop 2 or 3 times, it's a good idea to take your WD-40 can and spray every oil hole you can find. Spray around the bearing, spray, spray, spray. Get it down inside there, blast off everything you can find. Wipe off the excess with your either shop rag or paper towel. Be careful with paper towels. They can leave lint, but lint is not very bad for your engine. Actually, the worst it can form is carbon, and there's always a lot of carbon in an engine anyhow. So take the paper towel and clean off the rods, clean off the mains. In fact, if you really want to, you can give this a real bath with a WD-40 can. No, I won't do that simply because I've cleaned this off before, but I'll show you how it works. Get it in every oil hole, like so. You see how the main feeds the rods, this oil, like so. And the middle main will feed these 2 rods here. And you'll see it come out. If you see any dirt that comes out of any hole, investigate further and really blast out the oil passageways. In fact, some crankshafts have a soft plug where they drill an oil passageway straight through the side of the connecting rod journal into the mains. And when they do that, actually be over here, they would plug that passageway they drill with a soft plug. And that's an excellent trap area there for crud from like a spun bearing or just general crud in the engine to get in and get trapped. So you should always, on crank grind, remove and replace the soft plugs in the crank, clean out the area between, inside the crankshaft with either pipe cleaners or the like, and make sure everything is nice and clean. In fact, on the new reproduction cranks, the brand new ones, you have to take off the soft plugs of the new reproduction cranks and clean out the passageways, or you'll be sorry. There's heat treat slag inside. Okay, that crankshaft's pretty clean now. So we'll mix up our secret sauce now. You take your favorite oil. I like Pennzoil 2050, and I'm not paid to say that. I just like it. Use it in everything. It works fine. Pour some in an expendable dish that your wife doesn't know about. Take some STP. Now, purists may cringe, but this actually works. and make about a 50-50 mixture of STP and oil. Now it's thick enough. Use your finger or use whatever you want to use. Finger sometimes may be a little bit gross, but it works. Now, the STP by itself you shouldn't use. The STP and oil mixture makes everything thick enough that it will not come off the engine easily. It won't drool out, it won't leak off or lose the film. It will actually stay on the engine quite a long time, and you can store this engine then for quite a long time, 5 years or more. Okay, that's fairly well mixed now. I like Asseble lube. It's molybdenum disulfide. It's a surface lubricant, and it works very nicely at preventing any problems when you initially fire up the engine before oil pressure has been built up. Of course, when we assemble the engine, I'll show you how to minimize the delay in the buildup of oil pressure, but the Asseble lube works rather well. You should put that on the camshaft and cam lobes and the cam followers. Now, what you should do is take a nice clean finger, take a little bit of the Asseble lube on it, put a little bit on, avoiding the oil holes. You don't want to get the Asseble lube down the oil hole. You want to get it around the bearing journal, but not down the oil hole. And you take a little bit of the STP oil mixture and put that all over the journal, like so. Repeat with the next rod journal down. And continue doing this on all four. You can, if you want, coat one half like so, and then turn the crankshaft around and do the other half. The moly lube serves as a good protection against initial break-in, for initial break-in. So when you first fire the engine up, and before oil pressure is established, the moly lube, being a surface lubricant, will prevent seizure of the parts, etc. With the STP mixed in, it also serves very well to preserve everything. In fact, you can tip it here now and get the nice mixture all over. This is not aesthetically pleasing, being the color and consistency of kind of slime, but it works. And it's clean. And it's something that you have to do, so you have to get used to it. Rotate things around like yay. It'll slobber on various things, so you have to have a covering on your kitchen table if you're using the kitchen table. If you're not using the kitchen table, you have your own workbench. You don't have to worry about your wife complaining. Anyhow, get that fairly well lubricated. And then get out 8 connecting rod nuts, like so. And some red Loctite. I buy it in the 1-ounce container. It's a little cheaper that way. Actually, this is a 1.22-ounce container. Now, these are new rod nuts. You must use new rod nuts, like I was saying. You find where there's a mark on the rod nut, in this case 10B. Okay? You turn it the other side where the mark is not and put a drop of Loctite around on the threads, like so. Repeat for all 8 rod nuts. Find the side that does not have the mark on. The mark is a bit of a stress riser, and you're better off without it. Put a drop of the Loctite on the rod nut. Now, a lot of people don't like Loctite. I've heard some people complain about using it, but I find it does work. It lubricates the threads of both the rod nut and the rod. In fact, we'll be putting drops of this on the rod stud itself. And it does provide, I think, a reduction in the friction that generally results between the threads of the nut and the stud, and makes for a more accurate torque reading. So now we can separate the rod halves again. Just put a little bit. You don't need a full drop here. Just a little bit on the threads, like so. And all 8. Place the cap. Get out your torque wrench. I prefer a Sears or Craftsman type, or a Snap-on works fine. Dial click type, much better than the beam type. You need a 14mm socket, like so. We use that for the final torquing. You can use a regular wrench for putting the nuts on, or your fingers. Now, a little trick here. When you go to put the rod halves together, you'll note that when the numbers are both on the same side, the opposite side usually will have the tabs. Now think about the way the crankshaft rotates. It'll rotate like this. You put the tabs on this side, it is actually a little better because the stops are right here. In particular, the stop of the beam, where all the stress is taken during compression, is right here up against this other half of the rod. So I always assemble engines with the cutouts for the tabs on the right-hand side. So we'll take this rod now, put this on like so, feed the beam half in carefully, or the cap half in carefully, put the beam on, take two of your nicely lubricated with Loctite rod nuts, put them on as far as they'll go. Try not to move the rod very much, because if you move the rod too much, the bearing can stick to the lubricant inside. It is somewhat sticky. And maybe loosen the bearing for you. Again, make sure that the numbers are the same, like so, and that the tabs are on the opposite side, like so, and put them on like yay. Get another two rod nuts out. Carefully put the rod nuts on. Get another rod out. Check the numbers, 709. Check the tabs like yay. Put them on like so. Feed it carefully and gently. Put the nuts on. We'll show you a trick afterwards here of the proof of the pudding. That is, when you do assemble the crankshaft correctly, that all four rods should fall around the crankshaft at about the same rate. In fact, the better the machine work, the more smoothly and simultaneously they'll fall around, kind of like a band of rockets, if you will. Put that around like yay, put that down. Get the rod nuts out, stick the rod nuts on. Okay, tighten them down with your fingers. First setting for the torque wrench should be a mere 15 foot-pounds. And in fact, before we use a torque wrench, we use a regular wrench just to tighten them down evenly enough to get them snug. So you don't have to worry about the rod moving at that point. There we go, that's snug there. We'll do it on these here. These require a little more to go. It was a little tight getting on that one nut. Tighten your nuts down evenly. And try not to move the rod. Minimize the motion of the rod. And that way you won't have the bearing pop out or anything like that. And always use new rod nuts on this, on the connecting rods. The Porsche engine, if you treat it right when you're building it, and don't do stupid things like trying to hit 7,000 RPM, can last over 100,000 miles. In fact, the record so far is about 275,000 miles on one engine. In fact, the man that owns that engine has over 500,000 miles on the car, and it's still running. Now, I don't know how many cars there are out there with over 500,000 miles on the odometer, but I bet you can count them on your hands and fingers, maybe your toes. But the fact that Porsche has one of them at least is certainly a good sign of quality. In fact, I never thought I'd ever be doing anything like this. I never really liked foreign sports cars very much until I finally had an early Sunbeam Alpine. And then when I got my first Porsche, I realized there was a bit of difference in quality between Sunbeam Alpines and Porsches. I think it has a lot to do with the philosophy of the country. Okay, they're snug now. Set your torque wrench to about 15 foot-pounds, and then proceed to torque them down to 15 foot-pounds. 15. You hear the click. 15. 15. 15. You don't have to hold too much at this point, but when you get to 32.6, you'll have to hold the flywheel. If you put it on the ground, you could actually put your foot on it. You can also rig up a pretty effective flywheel holder merely by welding a Volkswagen flywheel nut to a VW oil pump cover. The next step up from 15 is 20 foot-pounds. I do the rods in 5 foot-pound increments. I find it's better to sneak up on the final torque of 32.6 foot-pounds than it is to torque them all down to 32.6 at once. Especially if you torque one rod at a time to 32.6 foot-pounds, that's pretty bad. I don't like doing that. But I like to torque them evenly, slowly, and when you do the final 32.6 foot-pound torque, do it 3 times. That way you won't miss any rod nuts. That way you'll get any that may have relaxed a little bit in the weighting process, though I've never seen one do that. Do it smoothly and easily. You have enough leverage on the torque wrench. That's 25. Now I'll go up to 30. At this point, I'll probably have to hold the flywheel from tipping. On the ground, it's not too bad. It's a little awkward here, but I think we can do that, like so. We'll do these. Do it slowly and continuously, and everything will work out okay. Now if you note that when I'm doing this, the rods are moving a little bit, that's actually a very good sign. It says they're not too tight. If you find one rod that does not move or is sticky, now is the time to find out the reason for it. Usually it's some dirt, but sometimes it's a mismachined rod or mismachined crankshaft. Okay, 32.6, you can go to 33 foot-pounds for the final torque. There it is there. 2, 3, 4. This is going to be a little more fun. 1, 2, 3, 4. It really helps to repeat this torque now at least once or twice more, simply to make sure that you've got it right, to make sure you've gotten every rod nut tight, and please the Porsche gods that you're double or triple checking your work. And that's really the way to do things. So you should always check things twice or 3 times. When I've screwed up, it's been because I've been in too much of a hurry. I didn't check things enough. And believe me, the one item you didn't check will come back to haunt you. So it's best you check everything. Okay, we've done that twice. Take the rods, put them like so. You can rotate the crank around like yay here. And twist the crank like so, and they all should fall at just about the same rate. And if they do, which I think you'll agree they do, that's the proof of the pudding. You can wiggle them back and forth, make sure there's not excessive side clearance on any one or both. Spin them around, make sure there's no area where they are tight. They aren't. In fact, you can tell from how smoothly they fall the quality of the machine work done on both the crankshaft and the connecting rods. In this case, it's pretty good quality. Next step, we'll put the gears on. This being a 50mm crankshaft, you have to put the main bearing on here first before you can put the cam drive gears on, the distributor drive gear. So to put the main bearing on, you have to have the case in front of you. The next step will be showing you how to put the main bearing and the gears on. Now we should cover this with a plastic bag, set it aside, and continue on with the videotape. We thank you again. Okay. We have gotten our clean case back to the machine shop, and as you can tell, it looks a little bit different than before I went to the machine shop. Machine shop will take and dunk the case in nice, good solvent like chlorinated hydrocarbon. It works really well. Don't use a hot tank or you'll end up destroying your case. Hot tank contains sodium hydroxide, which eats the aluminum very effectively. We have also checked out the case. That is to say, we have put the case halves together, torqued all 6 of the main case studs together, including the through bolt that goes through inside here, and measured the internal bore of the case with either a dial bore gauge or an internal micrometer. We found that this particular case was about 0.2 of a thousandths too big on the middle main, but that's fine. The factory gives you plus or minus 0.2 of a thousandth, which is not very much at all, on all the bearing bores. I find you can actually go about 0.5 thousandths above high limit on the cases and still be okay, get your normal 100,000 mile life out of them. But if anything more than about a thousandth or so, the crush of the bearing is actually held in place by the crush of the two case halves being torqued down around the bearing. And if you don't have sufficient crush, the bearing will then rotate in the case. And the dowel pins that hold, well, quote, hold the bearing in place, really don't hold the bearing in place. They're just there for alignment to make sure all the oil holes, etc. line up. Okay, do not rely on dowel pins to hold the bearing. In fact, when you take a case apart, if you look on the back of the middle main bearing, if you see the back of the middle main bearing area very shiny and multifaceted, that's a definite sign the case is going to have to be a line bored. Now in your line bore case, you put a boring bar inside and you bore the case out to the next oversize, which is 0.25 millimeter, or approximately, but not exactly, 0.010 of an inch oversize. This requires you to use oversized bearings whose outside diameter are likewise 0.25 millimeter larger than the standard bearings. Now they're getting hard to find, especially on an A or B case, but HCP Research has a pretty good selection of Glyco line bore mains, and first over on the case by first under on the crank. That's the most popular oversize. Now after the case comes back to you, you're not done yet with the cleaning process. You should either put it on your engine stand or torque it up, whatever, and make sure all little pieces of crud are off the case. You can go around the perimeter of the case with either a machinist stone, and that's not a designer drug used by machinists, that's actually a stone designed to clean off mating surfaces or smooth surfaces. Take all residual crud, mucilage, sealer, etc. off the case, everywhere you can find on the parting surfaces. You can use steel wool, but if you do, please follow with a rag or a paper towel to get any steel wool particles that may come off the steel wool. But clean the entire perimeter of the case. Clean also the area of the case where it seals up against the transmission, right in there, and clean the seal area too, where the pulley and crankshaft seals fit. Okay, once you have done that, I found one of the best things to use, or things that indeed work, is a can of WD-40 to clean things off with, and either, again, paper towels or rags. And what we can do is, you take the WD-40 can with the nozzle, put the nozzle into the oil cooler stand area, put your finger over it to keep it from flying back out, and push the button. And you can see the oil coming out of the oil passageways, which is good because one, that means they're clean. You can also check for any crud coming out, and we see just a little bit of crud here. So we'll do this for a minute or so, blow out any crud that we can possibly find the machine shop might have overlooked. And likewise, go into the other side. Now this is the main oil passageway to the engine. And you'll see it coming out of all the various bearing bores. And if you see any crud in there, keep doing it until you have it clean. Now you can also use high temperature water, like hook up a water hose to your hot water line and blast it off with a plastic nozzle in here, and the high velocity water will take out any crud that's left inside. It won't dissolve any hydrocarbons or anything, but it'll blast anything out that's in the case. The carrying power of liquid, of fluid, is proportional to the sixth power of the velocity. So the higher velocity fluid you have running through the case, the more crud it'll take up and remove as it goes through. Clean everything off. Make sure there's no particles coming out. Make sure all the passageways are clean. Sometimes people will put a remote oil cooler or filter on, and they'll actually plug a passageway in the main case half, or the third piece. And you got to make sure that hasn't been done to your engine sometime in the past. The oil pressure relief area, blow that out very effectively. And kind of tip the case over, like so, and get down inside all the areas that feed the camshaft. Camshaft and the cam followers are fed by this hole here. And if you want to take a look at that, maybe you can see that down inside one of the cam followers. You may have to use an entire can of WD-40, but they only cost about $2, $2.50 or something. Get them on special for $1.50, whatever. Blow out the cam bore or the lifter bore area really well. Do it on all four. Now this is pretty messy, of course, so you want to do it either outside or on some place where you can clean up the WD-40 that, of course, flies around here. But it really does help to get everything nice and clean. Get rid of any dust, dirt, etc., or any crud that the machine shop missed. Okay, now I can set this one aside for the time being. The other side of the case doesn't have too many oil supply holes. In fact, it pretty much only has one for the cam and cam followers. Oh, look at that. There's a little bit of crud there. Aren't we happy we're getting that out? You can then, after the case is pretty well clean with the WD-40 technique, take a rag or paper towel and reach inside both case halves here and clean out the sump area. I know it sounds fairly disgusting, but the case has been cleaned by the machine shop, so it really shouldn't be too bad. Don't be afraid of putting too much WD-40 in. It's a sort of a lubricant. It also evaporates fairly quickly, and we're putting regular oil, etc. in here anyhow, so there won't be any problem with the WD-40. Really get it out good. Any type of crud that's in the engine at this point can come out into your bearings and make a real mess. And the last place where the crud goes, of course, is in the bearings. So please make sure you do a hell of a good job getting this crud out. The machine shop, of course, did rinse it and did use solvent bath on it and a little solvent pump to pump solvent through all the oil passageways. But as you see, there's a little bit that they missed. And you are, like I said, the final sentinel between your engine and dirt that can kill your engine. All right, now what you should do is take a paper towel or a lint-free rag, spray the bearing bores like so, fold the towel over and clean out the area of the bearing bore, which is the oil distribution groove, and marvel at the amount of dirt that's on that rag or paper towel that's been missed by the machine shop. This is hard to get out dirt, and though it probably will stay in place and not come out into your bearings, it might, and we don't want that to happen. So we take a paper towel and we keep doing this, or rag, we keep doing this until the paper towel comes out clean. Now in the middle main area here, where there's kind of a deep gouge and a dowel pin to act like a blockage or a dam, you can find sometimes quite a bit of crud. So you have to do that a few times to get everything nice and clean. Also, you want to make sure that the bearing housing afterwards is dry. You don't want to have a lot of oil or crud on it because the bearing is really supposed to be tight in the case there. And if you have a lot of crud behind it, you can actually affect the crush of the bearing and the fit and the running clearances and all that. Speaking of running clearances, if you want to really discuss running clearances, the book Secrets of the Inner Circle has about a 10-page dissertation on running clearances with all the dimensions you need and all the calculations you need to find your running clearance in your engine and to set it up right, or to find out what it is, make sure it is right. In fact, you really should read Secrets of the Inner Circle, because this videotape can't begin to duplicate all the information that's in both Secrets, the ABCs, Murphy is my co-pilot, etc. There's over 1,600 pages of Porsche information and data, and it would take about 3 years or so to make a videotape that would encompass that, and you'd fall asleep after about the first 300 hours or so anyhow. So take a, like I say, clean out all the passageways. You don't want to see crud like that on the rag or paper towel. You want to get it all nice and clean. I know it's somewhat boring to do this, but it has to be done. It's a terrible job, but somebody has to do it, right? You can admire how nice and clean things do come when you do this. And you rest assured that you tried to do the best possible job that you could on your engine or on your customer's engine. It is this type of care that makes these things reliable. In fact, in some cases, we are building this engine to better specs than the factory did originally. Witness, for example, the balance of the connecting rods. The factory usually puts rods together with a tolerance of about plus or minus 2 or 3 grams, and we rebalance them to less than 1/10 of a gram. Pistons, take new Molle pistons, for example, please. We recently had a set of those, brand new Molle pistons, 24 grams difference in weight between some of the pistons. Net effect of that is we could not balance them. We had to send the set back. They were just too far out of balance to even consider balancing. Now, take the rag or another rag and wipe out the sump area. This time note how cruddy that becomes, so change rags or paper towels to a new one. Wipe out the sump very nicely. Wipe off everything that you have gotten WD-40 on. Check all over to make sure there's no pieces of paper towel or rag or any debris hanging on anything. Now is the time to do it. You'll never see the case apart like this again for a long time, if all goes well. So do it now. Okay, we pretty much got the cases in order now. They're fairly clean. We can deal with the bearings. The bearings, this is a B set of bearings. The case is standard, it's not a line board, so it's a standard Glyco set, which actually contained Kolben-Schmidt bearings sometimes. And there are, of course, 4 bearings altogether. The flywheel main bearing, as witnessed by the ridges, the thrust surfaces on it. Completely circular number 3 bearing. The split, 1/2, 2/2 middle main bearing. And the number 4 main bearing in the 3rd piece of the case. Okay, now, if you recall, I was saying we could not put the number 3 bearing on 50 millimeter A and B, 356 A's and B's, normals and supers. The number 3 bearing is completely circular. On CSC 912 Super 90, it's a 2-piece bearing, steel back bearing that fits in the case in such a way you can't mess it up. But on the A's and B's, it's a completely circular bearing. And you note the oil holes, like so, you might think are symmetrically located in the bearing, but they're not. In fact, we'll put a dowel pin in, and incidentally, don't drop these dowel pins down the oil hole of the case. The dowel pin hole is right next to the oil hole practically. You want to put the dowel pin in the dowel pin hole, and believe it or not, some people have put dowel pins in the oil holes, and the dowel pin gets forced into the bearing in such a way as to make a giant mess of everything. The story about that is in Secrets of the Inner Circle, in case you're interested. There are 4 dowel pins that go into a 356 A or B normal or super case. And there's 2 in the middle main, 1 for the number 3 main, like so, and 1 for the flywheel main. On CSC 912, there's only 1 dowel pin on the flywheel main bearing, and on Super 90s, they have no dowel pins. They're held in the bearings are held in the case by little tabs, little cutouts here. This case being an earlier super with a date stamp. Incidentally, the date stamps are right here. This is 2262, meaning it was made in fiscal week 22, year 1962. And this one here, as I recall, is 562. Yes, 562, meaning it was made in fiscal week 5. That's a difference of 17 weeks, or about 4 months, between this case half and this case half. But that's what the factory did sometimes, kept them in inventory for a while. That date stamp, incidentally, correlates to the case casting number up on top of the case very closely. And the Maestro Masters database of 2,000 engines and case casting numbers and date stamps is available now on the back of the new version of Secrets of the Inner Circle. That way you can look at the outside number, easily visible anywhere, and tell what the date stamp is and what characteristics these engines have. Like, this being an earlier super with a date stamp of early 62 does not have the tabs in the bearings for the late style main bearings. These are designed to take only the A or B type bearings, not the CSC 912 or Super 90. A little later, about 3 months later, they change and put the tabs in the bearings and the bearing bores so you can use any type of bearing in any type of case. In fact, after 62.5, all the cases are the same. Normals, CSC, etc., with minor differences, but the major components are all the same. And you can use a normal engine that's like a 63 with a Super 90 crank very nicely. Don't know why you want to do that offhand, but you can do it if you want to. Anyhow, getting back to number 3 main bearing, you'll note you put this number 3 main bearing in the case. You can put it in the case either that way, and see where the oil hole is here. I hope you can sort of see that. I guess if we turn it this way, you can see a little better. Oil hole sticking out a bit. You can also put it in the other way and see the oil hole is inside the case. Makes a difference which way you put this bearing in. You want to put this bearing in so the oil hole is sticking out, quote, out of the case. It would help if I look at it first. There we go. Like so. That is the only correct way of putting it in. And you want to do this beforehand. because of a couple of reasons. One, when you put this bearing on the crankshaft, you had better put it on right. If you put it on wrong, there's a reason for why this oil hole is as it is. When the case halves are together, crankshaft's rotating clockwise, you want to have the oil supplied to the crankshaft just before bottom dead center. That's why the factory went to some effort to put this oil hole not symmetrically located. Consequently, you want to make sure you put it in this way. So now we're going to put this bearing on the crankshaft. And we save the crankshaft for that very purpose. We will bring it over here. Remember the crankshaft? We will first clean our hands off, take some Molly lube, put it on the bearing journal, avoiding, if at all possible, the oil holes in the bearing journal. Take our secret sauce, remember the STP oil mixture, coat the bearing area with the secret sauce, and then, since the crank rotates clockwise, and this bearing is now arranged the way it should be, we can merely take the bearing out, and without changing it at all, stick it over the crank like that. If everything's right, it should fall down, like so. And we can now put the gears on the crankshaft. You have to put the bearing on first on the 50mm cranks before you can put the gears on. The case is pretty much dealt with. We'll attach it to our engine stand, put the cam followers, cam, etc. in, but now I'll show you how to put the gears on the crankshaft. Don't forget to put your dowel pins in. Make sure they're all snugly down inside there. They don't protrude too far. And there are two types of dowel pins. There's the dowel pin for the AB engine, which is a VW dowel pin, and the dowel pin for the CSC 912 is a longer, slightly larger diameter dowel pin that will not interchange with the earlier engines. Now, the dimensions on the dowel pin are given in both the spec book and Secrets of the Inner Circle, so you won't get confused. But in general, use the old dowel pins from your engine unless there's something wrong with them. And if you have a 50mm crankshaft and a case that's made before 1963, you can use VW dowel pins. But on a 912 case, you have to use the extra long, extra thick, larger diameter 912 dowel pins available only from the Porsche dealer. Or you can manufacture them, but you should buy them from the dealer. Okay, we'll take a break now and go get the gears. We will now take the gear, and the arrangement of the gear is we have the cam drive gear goes on first, followed by a spacer. These are VW parts, 36 horsepower actually, followed by the distributor drive gear, followed by the lock ring. And to put these on the crankshaft, you don't just stick them on and pound them on. You take them to your toaster oven or your regular oven and put the steel gear in first, heat it up to about 250 degrees or so. You can do it on a gas stove, but you have to be very careful. You can overheat on a gas stove very easily. If you're doing it on a gas stove, the color of the gear at the maximum temperature you want to have it at should turn a little bit straw gray or straw brown, kind of like straw colored. We'll take this out now, heat it up, bring it back, and show you how you put the gears on the crankshaft. Be right back. You take the gear, stick it over the crankshaft, get it aligned with the key, flop right down. Now there's a bevel in this gear, which I'll show you in a pad later. Take a screwdriver, tap it down, don't overdo it, it's usually down pretty well as it is. You need a pair of snap ring pliers, pretty heavy duty. Take the spacer, stick the spacer over, take the snap ring pliers, expand the spacer a little bit to get over everything, like so. Tap it down till it's snug against the steel cam drive gear. Take your distributor drive brass gear, it doesn't have to be heated up quite as much. It should fit in there with very little trouble. Don't ding this too hard, just tap it very mildly, like so. Again, take your lock ring, stick that over. Take your lock ring pliers, requires a little bit of care, get it over the bearing so it doesn't scratch anything, and get it inside. This may sometimes take a bit of doing. I have to go on this side, I'm sorry. Lights be damned. Like so. Now if it does tend not to want to go over, you take a screwdriver, lay it there, wacko, and everything's cool. I tend to move this thing around a little bit to make sure it's seated right. In fact, you should tap it. Make sure it's seated. Tap it in a little bit. Tap it over. And tap it around. There we go. Now, you want to make sure that your bearing doesn't get affected by the heat. That's pretty warm. Spray WD-40 on the combination. Everything will cool down very fast, contract, and be very nice. Now, this is the bevel I was referring to of the drive gear. This bevel here, you notice only on one side. It does not have a bevel on this side here, but only on this side here. This bevel goes down up against the crank. There's a radius here, actually here, that this bevel goes up against. If you put the gear on wrong, two things will happen. One, it won't go down far enough, and two, the timing mark, two little dots on the gear teeth here, the timing mark that has to fit in the gear tooth on the camshaft that had the 0 on it. So if you have this the other way, you won't see that either. Also, the gears are pointing the wrong direction, you'll have a real mess. So be sure you put the bevel downwards. Okay, that's about all we're going to do on this right now. We can set this aside. We'll be putting it in the case momentarily. Next step is to put the bearings inside the case. We have now gotten the gears on the crankshaft successfully. Next step is to put the bearings in the case and the cam followers in the case. First thing you should do is put the flywheel main bearing in the case. Fortunately, it only goes in one way. The dowel pin's there. The dowel pin hole in the bearing is right there. And you can't put it any other way than that. So you put that in the case. Actually, what you should do first is make a mark with a pencil. You can use a screwdriver to make a scratch, but a pencil doesn't make a scratch, of the outline of where that dowel pin is. And then put the bearing in the case, like so. Get it down on the dowel pin. You can rotate it until it snaps down inside. And make a mark with the pencil where that dowel pin is. That way you can get both the mark on the bearing lined up with the mark in the case when you put the bearing in the case when it's on the crankshaft, and have it snap down nice and easily. We can leave that there for the time being. Well, I better take it out since you have to see the middle main. Middle main bearings have an oil inlet area, as you perhaps can see there, and a little cutout notch. That cutout notch is really to supply oil on the pre-1957.5 engines. They don't serve any purpose here on the later model engines, but it's nice to know that they make bearings that will fit in any model Porsche from 1950 on up to about 1963. Anyhow, the oil inlet hole is there. Oil inlet hole in the case is here on the middle main. So you make sure when you put the bearing in that the oil hole and the bearing in the case line up. And you always push the bearing down by the end of the bearing, not by the middle of it, like so. Now on the other case half, where the other half of the middle main goes, there is no oil hole. So you can either put the oil hole like so, or like so. If you put it like so, then of course the oil groove is down at the bottom of the case. If you put it up on top, the oil groove is at the top of the case. Well, I kind of like to split the difference. Here the oil groove is at the top, and in the earlier engines where the oil was supplied at the bottom of the case, I think that's not a bad idea, so I put the other oil groove so it's at the bottom of the case like so. It supplies oil to the crankshaft and at the bottom of the case where the crank tends to rest. I really think that's the best place for it. Okay, now we will lubricate these things a little bit later, but the next step is to get your cam followers out. These cam followers have been resurfaced with a 25-inch or more spherical radius here, a convex radius. That's to mate with the cam properly. And unlike many people, we also bevel the edge of the cam follower. We bevel that so that when the cam hits it, you don't have a sharp edge here on the cam follower that would eat into your camshaft. This is called surfacing the cam follower, and this of course is the good style Atte cam follower It really is a very nice one. It has very few problems, like none. Some of the replacement ones aren't quite so nice. Okay, so what we first do is when we get them back to the machine shop, we line them up here. In fact, it's nice to line them up with the oil inlet hole, which will now be the oil outlet hole, pointing in some benign direction here, like away from everything else, or you. Line them up like little soldiers, about to invade. We take our WD-40 can with nozzle, and we clean out. Make sure that the oil, WD-40, will spray out here, like so, through the oil hole. Now there's some replacement type cam followers that do not have the hole drilled all the way through the shank, and ergo when you go to do this you'll find that there's no oil coming out that hole. If you find one like that, replace it with one that in fact